Hi, everyone. So, this is my visual portion of my application for the scenario, and my name is Natalie. So, just like a scenario overview, we're presented with a friend who's struggling mid semester with 6 weeks left, and they're balancing a heavy course load with a lot of labs and workshops while also going through some tough personal stuff, such as a 10-month breakup. And they feel isolated and pressured by their family, who they've been not fully upfront with about their coursework and their academics, and they feel that they're falling behind in their classes. So, my immediate response would be to listen first without judgment or interruption. I know that college, and like I know this from personal experience, and like also just having friends and knowing people, that college can be a really really difficult time for a lot of reasons. But I think the most obvious one is that you are in a different place, and it's almost hard to not feel isolated at times, even if it's not your freshman year or your freshman fall. So I think listening first without judgment or interruption is really, really important. You want the person to feel heard. You want them to understand that you are listening and that you are hearing them and not just letting go in one ear and out the other. And I think one really good way to do that is like after they, talk about their feelings, you can validate their emotions and maybe even relate it to something that you went through, if you think that's appropriate. So saying stuff like, this sounds really hard, and like it makes sense that you feel the way you do, and like I'm sorry that you're going through this. Like for me, that's always really great to hear, and just like that acknowledgement that like my feelings are valid, and like this does suck, and it's okay to be sad. I think a lot of people's immediate response is to sort of like, it's fine, or push things down, whatever, things like that. But I think that that's really unhealthy. And I think giving someone the place to feel their emotions authentically is one of the most intimate things you can do. Um, and so I think a really good way to do that as well is to avoid offering quick fixes like immediately. So personally, like when I'm venting about how I feel and like someone is only giving me like solutions, it kind of can come off as insensitive, as if like they don't have time for what I'm saying. And so sometimes you really don't necessarily need advice or solutions, but you more so need like a shoulder to lean on, or like a space to be vulnerable in. And so I would say this is a really, really important one. Like avoid offering quick fixes, especially before they finish their entire story. Make sure that you're able to like view it holistically, and then also ask open-ended questions. So get a better sense of how they're feeling, um, what they think the biggest problem is, what is like bothering them in their mind the most. And like also, I don't think it's a bad thing to say like, what do you need the most right now? Like support, structure, advice, space. Like I always ask my friends that, because I don't want to risk coming off as insensitive or like uncaring if I'm giving advice when they really want comfort. So I think the most pressing matter would be the emotional and mental health aspect. I think that personally, I've always prioritized academics over everything. But if I was in a position where I saw my friends struggling and I wanted to help them, the first place I would direct my focus to, or our focus to, would be emotional and mental support. So personally, I've used the university counseling center like the entirety of my freshman year. Um, it was a really important resource for me, and if this is my friend, I'm assuming that they already know the context of that. But if they don't, I think sharing like a small anecdote about how seeing like having a therapist for the first time and like working that into my day to day life really really improved my mental health. Excuse me. Um, and they also have therapy programs which you can sign up for. So, like I was saying, like for a couple weeks or the entirety of the semester, and they also have immediate access to therapy if you feel like you need it. And there's also the Care Network, where you can submit a confidential concern if you feel that like a student's safety is genuinely at risk. Um, the Care Network really just acts to like as like a resource hub, from my understanding, to direct students, but it's completely confidential, and um, it's another great resource on campus. But personally, I would really really recommend the University Counseling Center, because these are professionals who can help you navigate difficult feelings, um, and just dealing with those difficult feelings while also being X miles away from home, and the multitude of things that come with college. And then the second thing I would approach would be academics. So I would probably, my first gut reaction would be to help my friend draft personal emails to their professors, given that they feel comfortable enough being vulnerable with them, and, professionally, but effectively explain, their personal issues and basically just request some leniency, maybe with deadlines, things like that. And then I would also help my friend plan all my classes, where I'm struggling, like what is hard for me right now, and like the best way per each class that we can move forward. So we can see that if TLC tutoring would be a good option, we can schedule those appointments together. Or I can help draft emails for requesting private office hours, which is something that I do all the time. And my professors are usually nice enough to permit that. But also as a TA, and like as someone who has used TAs as a very, very valuable resource, reaching out to them is always a good idea because they can understand you from like the student perspective that I think oftentimes it's hard for a professor to. So I think they're another really great resource. And then also, I don't think this would be a bad idea, but setting up a meeting with an academic advisor to analyze your options. I think realistically, like if you are really struggling, there is absolutely no shame in taking a semester off. A lot of people do that. And I think that if this were a really horrendous situation for my friend personally, I don't necessarily think that it's always the best to keep pushing. I think sometimes, depending on how they're feeling, it's actually better to take a step back. Um, and that's a really drastic example, but I think that the academic advisor would be able to more, help them contextualize like a plan, given that they understand their career goals, their academic goals, things like that. And then below attached here is a screenshot of an email I actually sent my freshman fall when I was struggling with something incredibly personal. And my RA at the time actually helped me draft this. And I still think about this all the time because I genuinely didn't know how to approach the situation. I felt so incredibly overwhelmed. Like, my thoughts, like, I really couldn't keep them together, let alone write an email that was coherent and professional and also honest. And so my RA sort of acted as like a buffer to help accurately but professionally capture what was going on. And this is what we came up with. So I basically emailed my professor and just told him in the subject line that I had some sensitive information that I need to share regarding the completion of my work related to his course. And I reached out basically just saying that I needed to reschedule an exam. And he was very understanding of it, given my circumstances. And while I can't guarantee that every professor will be as understanding, I think I would say most interactions I've had with professors in this context have been very, very like kind and rewarding. And I think that if you're respectful, but also like honest that you're a human and you're struggling, like I think there's at least some flexibility that they can afford you. And if not, then you work around it. And then I think that this is the next most important step, but step three would be social reconnection. Like I was talking about before, isolation is really common in college. I think like even if you have a big group of friends and you're involved, like I think the nature of college can just be isolating. So I think that a really good way to do this would be to schedule sort of like informal one-on-one meetings with your friend, sort of without knowing that they're like scheduled, if that makes sense. But, make it casual, say like, hey, like, every Friday, do you want to grab dinner? Like we can check in, see how you're doing. This is something that my RA did for me, and she just went above and beyond. I don't really know if that would be within the scope of an RA's job. I think she was just an incredibly kind person. But if this is my friend and I'm not looking at it strictly from like an RA perspective, I think that this is something I would do. I think that if this was a student and I was the RA, like this would be slightly more formal, but I would still schedule periodic meetings with them just to check in on them. But I think this could look like any normal activity you would do together as long as the friend is sharing their feelings free of judgment. So the first thing I thought of, like I said, was like dinner on Friday nights because you have to eat dinner at some point. And so that might take some pressure off, but it also allows you to sort of set boundaries about, when you want to be the person listening and when you can't be. And also, I would encourage them to remain involved in things that they care about on campus. So I know when I was going through a really rough time my freshman fall, the last thing I wanted to do was like get involved. Like I just wanted to not talk to anyone. Um, and I realized that no one was going to like push me to stay involved. So I just really just mustered up all the courage I can. I tried something new. I walked onto the women's rowing team. I've never rowed before, and that was probably one of the best decisions I made for myself freshman year because now I have, I think, honestly, lifelong friends and I'm learning an incredible sport. But it also gave me somewhere to channel, my feelings, and it gave me a place to feel connected with. It gave me people that made me feel grounded. And I think that when you take that brave step to, rebuild social connection, it is very, very life changing. And then I know that this friend specifically, we talked about family, maybe not being the most receptive to their feelings, but I would say, if possible, reach out to a sibling. I think a sibling is always someone who can give a really, really good perspective because they understand the dynamic between you and your parents. They understand what it's like being the child of your parents, and they understand you at a very intimate level because they are your sibling. I'm speaking from like a very general experience, having like a great brother. I mean, this isn't like a catch all, but I think that reaching out to one family member at least would be really responsible. And I think that would help the student. And then, so if I'm structuring like our first formal convo, I kind of touched on this before, but I would choose a small, quiet, private place to discuss. I would probably let my friend choose just so that they feel more comfortable. So if they want to do their room, we could do that. If they want to do my room, if they want to do Starbucks, like whatever they wanted. And then empathy. So remind myself to be understanding, even if their not feelings are ones I haven't had much experience with. And then reflect and collaborate. So rather than simply direct them like, oh, you should do this, just go to UCC. You should, form a plan together. Like, would it help if we did this, or would it help if I XYZ? And then also on top of all that, reassurance. I think that's very important. Um, just remind them like, hey, we're all human. Like, stuff happens. A month from now, I could be in your shoes, and I'd I'd want someone to take care of me. So I think that's really important, and just really just listening rather than necessarily wanting to give immediate solutions. I think that's really important. And then reflecting on this and how it's relevant to being an RA, I think supporting peers requires a lot of empathy, but also boundaries. Because as a RA, your role is a connector. You're not a counselor. You're not professionally trained. And so you do get a sense of how to handle crises and confidentiality, but you also are a student yourself and you need to make sure that you are also prioritizing yourself. So like you need to be taking care of yourself in order to take care of other people. And again, I want to touch on my own experience when I was going through like a horrendous personal time. My RA was an incredible resource, but she also was very, very good at having her own boundaries. And, I respected that. Um, and it made me want to pursue this position. So thank you so much.